Hey, Deliberate Leaders. I am your host, Allison Dunn, executive coach and founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, dedicated to helping leaders build strong, thriving businesses. Each episode, we feature inspiring interviews to help you on your leadership journey. Super excited to introduce our guest today. We have with us Joel Schwartzberg. He is a leadership communications coach whose clients include American Express, Blue Cross Blue Shield, State Farm Insurance, to name just a few. He has previously held senior level communication and editorial positions with Time, PBS, Nickelodeon. He is the author of Get to the Point, Sharpen Your Message and Make Words Matter, which my favorite person, Seth Godin, calls the manifesto to giving talks that make a difference, as well as the author of The Language of Leadership, How to Engage and Inspire Your Team. Super excited to dive in today tips on how to make communication more purposeful, meaningful, and inspirational. Joel, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Allie. It's my pleasure.
Excellent. I like to kick these off with a quick, deliberate conversation. What would be your number one leadership tip for our Deliberate Leaders listeners?
I would boil it down to three words. Leaders make points. Now, of course, leaders need to understand what their point is before they can successfully convey it. But this is different from leaders sharing ideas, leaders sharing history, leaders sharing data, leaders sharing information. People look to their leaders to make and defend and prove strong points. And that's really the bread and butter of what I most often talk about. And if I could share only one thing with leaders, it's to put that idea in their heads. People expect you to be, and if you want to have impact, you need to be a point maker.
How can you give us a quick structure on how to actually affect it? I think that's such a fantastic tip. How can someone do that?
Right, and I like to work in the world of nuts and bolts. I like to give ideas, not just philosophize or coach people on a way to think about something. I enjoy tactics. And so one of the tactics I use to help people understand their points is first to understand what a point is not. This is what people confuse points with. They confuse points with topics, themes, ideas, notions, sometimes catchphrases, sometimes categories. So when you ask someone what their point is, they may say, my point is podcasting. Well, what have they not told you? They've not told you the importance of podcasting, how podcasting relates to their bottom line, the future of podcasting, what kind of podcasting. Someone is not actually making a point about podcasting until they say something like, podcasting is the mechanism through which we're going to reach our important millennial audience. Now you're making a point, an argument, a proposal. What do I intend to do? And there's a test that I have in my book, Get to the Point, that I use that I'm going to share with you because it's so simple. Even children can use it. It's called the I believe that test. And basically, you take what you think is your point, usually a sentence, and you put the words I believe that in front of it. Now, if you have a complete sentence, not a fragment, not a run-on, something that would impress your fourth grade language arts teacher, then you are well on your way to making a point. Now we need to just tighten that point and learn how to champion that point. But if it is not a complete sentence, then you need to reimagine it so it fits that framework. So for example, let's go back to, let's say, leadership. I believe that leadership, not a complete sentence, not a point. Even I believe that the importance of leadership, not a complete sentence, not a point. But when you say, I believe that leadership involves listening to your employees, that's a complete sentence. And you can just tell by the sense of it, by listening to it, that it is something that makes you say, go on, something you want to hear more about. It intrigues you, it interests you. And done in the right way, it'll also engage and inspire people.
That is a great tip and a great way to just double check whether or not you're making your point.
Right.
So, fantastic. Thank you for the structure behind that. I appreciate that. In the intro of us connecting, there was some surveyed research that was provided. And so I'm just going to quickly read that, and then I'd like to kind of dive into that. So The survey done by Brunswick Group said 93% of workers reported that leadership that communicates directly and transparently is what keeps them on the job, bested only by pay and ability to move up. So 93% of workers, I wonder what the other 77% want.
It makes you wonder, right?
It does. In evaluating people that maybe you're coaching or working with, or the work that you do, how do you help people identify whether they're communicating directly and transparently? And I know both of those are like clear words to me, but how do we help them get there?
Right. And I'm glad we're asking this question, because often you could say to someone, hey, can you speak more directly? Can you speak more transparently? And they're like, all right, how do I start? Often we ask people to sound more like a leader or to sound more confident.
I have heard that so many times. My boss said, I'm being told I need to sound more like a leader. I mean, that's great feedback, right?
Right. But how is that actionable?
Right.
So let's take that apart and look at both elements of it. Being direct is understanding, for example, that not only that less is more, as writers know, but that more is less. When you add ideas to your point, your brain might be thinking, well, it's like a Christmas tree. The more glowing things I put on it, the more details, it's great for this, it's great for that. Here's some way we can use it in the past, present, future. It makes it more valuable. But what you're actually doing is making it harder for your audience to process it. When your audience has multiple ideas, they compete with each other for their attention. And in that competition, the impact of each point is actually diluted. So I often say, if you say a lot of things, your audience will remember none. If you say some things, they'll remember some. If you say one thing, your audience will remember all. So a big part of being direct is about being concise, boiling it down to your most important and most impactful point. Now, when we talk about being authentic or transparent to me, I move it into authenticity because this is what we want when something is transparent. We want someone to be real and authentic. And ways to create authenticity often involve making sure that you never say anything or communicate anything that doesn't sound like you. A lot of leaders have speechwriters, and I know all about that world, or they have committees of people that are doing the editing on just one email. But number one for leaders, making sure it sounds like them. Number two, I'll give you one more tip on that, is to remove the script. Whenever anyone is reading to their audience, they are no longer presenting, they're performing. And they could read to themselves, they could read to their pets. A true communication is recognizing it's a live environment. And right here, right now, in real time, I am making a point to you. I am not reading to you. I'm not talking about something I prepared several days ago. It is also very hard to express emotion while you're reading something. That's two very different things, and your brain has trouble toggling between those two things. So do not go in with a word for word script. Go in with the most important points that you need to convey.
I think when I think of some great leaders, like there's a storytelling component where you bring someone along on a journey, but that also reminds me a little bit of describing the Christmas tree, right?
Right.
So how do you balance that? Because I personally appreciate a story as long as I can apply it and get the point of it. So I think, you're like kind of driving it back. What's the balance?
Right. And stories are very important, and they connect to authenticity. That's another great way to be authentic, is to tell a personal story, because only you can tell that personal story. But here's the interesting thing about storytelling. You can go to conferences about storytelling. You could read entire books. You could Google it. Story. But to me, here's the most important part of the story. It is not the story. It is the part where you say, this story is important because this story illustrates why we must. This story is a case study proving that if we do X, it'll lead to Y. Because you don't want to just tell a story that's riveting. You want to tell a story that's relevant. And the only way to do that is not to rely on your audience to extract that relevance, but to say it explicitly with those words I just said. The story I just shared is a great example of, shows why we must, illustrates the obstacles in front of us and how we can overcome them. Those are the most important parts of the story, because that's where you attach relevance, and that's what your audience, your teams, your employees are looking for, statements and points of true relevance.
Yeah. Fantastic. Good stuff. I know that you have some tips on what's the one thing that every team member wants to hear in leadership communication and how to express it correctly. Give us some tips.
Well, there are a number of things, but we often confuse them with other things. Like we sometimes think the audiences want to be entertained or they want to be informed. But the big things they are looking for, and I think one of the biggest things is vision, a future, a description of what is at the end of this road. What will it take to get there? And why is that end important for us? This is the one thing that often falls into a leader's job role and not onto other people's job roles, like a subject matter expert or someone in charge of data. It is truly the job of the leader to paint that picture of the world we want to live in if we all do our jobs correctly and together. And so I think that the iteration and the description of that vision, of that future, is really critical and something that all employees are looking for from their leadership, because that leader is driving the boat. And usually it's only the driver who knows where that boat is headed.
In the work that I do, I think it's always a challenge for how often do you describe that vision and how often you do that. And so I say you can never share enough that this is how we're achieving the vision. In articulating a vision concisely, like I think that's also another challenge that I see a lot of companies come up with, is how clear is their vision and how quickly can it be articulated? Do you have any guidance around that?
Right. I think it goes back to the basics of a point. You want to be specific. Like one of the things I often say is try to avoid badjectives, whether you're talking about your vision or you're talking about hope. These two things are connected in terms of the one thing you want your audience to receive. But we often use words like, well, this is a great way to get to that point. This is an awesome or very good approach to reach our goals. Or our goals are awesome. And I see this all the time because, especially when we tweet, it's easy. It's easy to throw in these badjectives, these words that are so broad that they have very little meaning. What does it mean for something to be great, to be terrific? And by the way, what is terrific to you, Allie, may not be terrific to me, or important to you may not be important to me. Now, here's how to overcome those badjectives so that you're expressing that hope and expressing that vision clearly. You ask yourself why. So I made a statement that this approach is great. Why is it great? Well, it's going to make our process more efficient, so we could put more money into R&D and guarantee a future. So we know that this process is great because it does this, it makes us more efficient. Now you don't even need the great word anymore. So instead of going from A to B to C, just go from A to C. This approach will make us much more efficient. And when we're efficient, we can use those resources to really guarantee a positive future for the entire organization.
Okay, so I think that's a excellent way to tie it back in and have a meaning behind it and what you mean by it when you're stating.
Right, a very specific and meaningful meaning.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk about, motivation and inspiring and all the things that we can do as a leader. So I think I'm gathering from you, like at least I believe you can't really motivate people. Motivation has to come from within, but it is our job as a leader to inspire. How can a leader be inspirational or inspire others? What are some tips around that?
Right. So we talked about being specific.
Mhm.
We talked about being concise. Often it involves putting your reputation on the line and using phrases like, I recommend, I propose, I suggest. A leader's inspirational when that leader is not afraid to put something out there, because that's what people expect from their leaders. But Ali, here's one mistake I see leaders making when they think they're being inspirational and they're not. And that is this idea that information alone is inspiring. If I give you the history and the data and how much money is involved and how big the investment is and how many places we're going to open up around the country, and then say, thank you very much, I've described all the content as if it were inventory. But I've never said to you, here's what that will do for us. Here's why this will bring us success. And it's in that moment that you create inspiration, where you're saying, this is how we're going to use this information to achieve this vision, to achieve our goals. Sometimes I have clients who sell things. They sell posters and hats and pins. And I say, all right, give me your best sales pitch. And they say, all right, well, you see this hat? I can give you 6 colors on your logo on this hat, and an elephant can stomp on this hat and it won't crush. And this pin is very special. There's a special nanotechnology where it'll pierce your clothes, but it won't pierce your skin. You'll never cause bleeding. And I'll give you 2 logos for free on that all over. And she did the whole inventory. And when she was done, I said, did you sell me on your point? And she said, yes, I described everything, often as leaders do. I described the inventory and the history. And I said, you know what I never heard from you? I never heard you say that if I buy your product, I will be more successful. And that was her point. And that's what I mean by the language of leadership. Mm-hmm. We often use it in this phrase of sell me the pen, right? Am I going to talk to you about this pen being blue ink or with this kind of cap or this kind of price point? But really, how is the pen an instrument for communication? So at the end of the day, what leaders really need to do is not think so much of their communication as content or information or even education. It's about making a point. What does all of that content lead up to? Where will it bring us? And how will you take us there?
Good. Another angle in the communication that we find leaders do is that they don't focus their communication on their team.
Right.
Or their audience, but instead on themselves. So
right.
Could you give us some insights on that and why it is so important, where to put the focus?
Sure. A lot of my clients who are leaders, they start a communication by saying, what should I say? Mm-hmm. And that can open up anything, right? Because there are lots of things that our leaders want to say, but they never compare what they want to say to what their audience, 2 things, wants and needs to know. And at the end of the day, you could speak to your blue in the face, but if you're not connecting to your audience, if they're not buying what you're selling, let's put it that way, what's the point? It's not a contest to see what you can say. It is truly a moment where it all depends on what your audience, what your team, what your employees receive and what they will do with it. Will it have an impact on them? And I want to explore that word impact. Impact means, will they think anew or do something different as a result of that communication? So we talked about the wrong question. The right question is, what does my audience want to know and what do they need to know? Then leaders, when they answer that question, they can work backwards and decide, well, what is in my knowledge base or what is in things I know that they don't, that will answer those questions for them, that will satisfy their need and their want. Often I separate communications into 2 things, a need to know and a need to know. And sometimes we focus a lot on the need to know, little details or drama or funny things or entertaining things. Those should fall well beyond the need to know. And a good exercise is actually separating those two things, maybe with the help of your executive team. What is truly need to know, what matches what they want and need to hear, and what is need to know, something I maybe found interesting.
Yeah. If you have a diverse audience that you're speaking to, what guidance can you do to make sure that you're applying the right message, but not watering it down for someone else?
Right. You do need to understand your audience. And one of the ways that takes place, one of the things that leaders and speakers need to do is know, do they understand already a certain level of what I'm saying? So I don't need to be redundant, or I don't need to give them the 101 on what this information is. Can I go to a higher level? And then also understand the different experiences of that audience in terms of their job roles. There are a lot of specific elements that go into this. If you're thanking people, make sure you're not leaving someone out, and appreciate everyone in your audience. Do not use gender specific language. A lot of leaders still go, hey guys, hi guys, thanks guys. No, we need to elevate past that these days. And finally, we need to recognize that people learn and receive information differently. I get a lot of feedback that my advice on PowerPoint is old school. We shouldn't use PowerPoint anymore. PowerPoint is dead. And I counter that with one idea. And that idea is this: you know what? I'm a visual learner. I need the visuals to reinforce what you're saying. If I just hear it, I won't process it as well as if I see it. For that reason alone, that is why visuals help reinforce a point. So that is another way of recognizing different learning styles in your audience, so you can reach each person at a level where they're best able to receive your points.
Yeah. I do like the fact that you've talked, because there's lots of different ways to communicate. And when you eliminate, whether it's auditory or whether it's visual, whether it's kinesthetic, and how important it is to include all of those if you can, when possible. Even though it's an extra step to some people, it's super important.
Right. And make sure, like I said, not to be exclusionary, whether it's thanks or whether it's just making your point. Find ways, it's a leader's job to bring everyone together, put everyone on the same page and united in a purpose. So find ways to talk about that purpose in ways that are inclusive in every way possible.
Yeah. Excellent point. Why should leaders focus on solutions versus problems?
Right.
Because we like to talk about problems.
Yeah. And we often feel like we need to dive into the challenge as leaders. This is where we're headed, maybe because we don't think our employees understand the true challenge, or we want to prepare them for not reaching our goals or realigning our goals. But I believe that it is the job of the leader to be the person who sells the solution, not over focuses on the problem. Imagine that the leader, again, is I'm not nautical. I keep going to these boat themes, but imagine that.
It works for me. I like compasses. So anything that, gives it, back to that, I'm good.
Right. We've all seen the Titanic. So imagine that you're the captain of a ship that's taking on water. Okay. Do people on the boat really want to hear how high the water is getting and how far we are from land? Or do they want to hear what instruments can we use, or what ideas can we put together to find our way back home safely? And even though that Titanic trip is an extreme example, I think it truly applies. And we talked before about what people expect from their leaders. They expect their leaders not just to dive into the problem, but to point the way out of that problem, or to point to ways we can ideate our way out of that problem. So even if there's not a clear solution, saying this is what I propose, making it a point. I propose we form a committee of our best thinkers on this subject, and maybe bring in people from the outside or specialists to create 3 to 5 recommendations to get us out of this mess and to put us back on the track of success. See, now that's not even a solution to the problem, but a roadmap for a way to get to the solution to the problem.
In a leader's ability to kind of identify, maybe proposing a solution, have you ever encountered that they are trying to address the wrong problem with a solution? And how do you get to the bottom of it and then clearly identify the solution that is proper?
Right. I have clients who are leaders who believe that an audience of employees value the same thing as an audience of the board of directors. And those are two, you cannot take that PowerPoint from class A and do the same thing for class B. So when it's about finding the right problem that you want to focus on, it's really about understanding your audience, your team, and the challenge that they're facing, not even the challenge that you're facing. I meet some leaders who like to talk about all the professional development and coaches they have and what they're trying to overcome personally. Nobody really cares that much, really. I mean, yeah, that's nice. And maybe you get some authenticity points for that. But at the end of the day, they're more interested in the challenge that I'm facing as an employee, not necessarily the challenge that you're facing as the executive. So by any means possible, whether it's surveys, whether it's direct conversation, whether it's meeting with department heads, find out the biggest challenges that your team and your employees are facing and calibrate your communications so that you're not guessing as to what the challenges are, or you're focusing on the challenges for the big organization and the executive leadership team. It's really all about helping employees overcome the challenges they feel, large and small. Either you're going to do it yourself or you're going to work with your HR team to address those challenges. But you're right, focusing on the right challenge is crucial, because if you're focused on the wrong challenge, there's no relevance and people are going to tune out. Even worse, you may lose reputation points because you're not connected to what your team is most interested in overcoming. So yeah, job one is always recognize what that audience, and I come back to this time and time again, what they want and what they need, and then create your communications to match that.
Fantastic tips. I just want to make sure if there were any tips I'm leaving on the table. So are there any additional ways that leaders can improve the effectiveness of the meetings that they're holding and how they're communicating in those meetings?
Yeah, the last thing I would say is really about that meeting place, because there's an instrument of the meeting that sends leaders and only leaders in the wrong direction, and that is the agenda. The agenda is a list of topics, not points. And leaders ideally bring points into a meeting. They don't just say, let's talk for a while about our financial state. And hopefully someone will have a good idea, right? No, a point is, I believe that this approach will help us save money so we can put more resources against this special project. I'd like to hear some feedback on that. And that way you generate feedback that makes sense, not just spitballing and having ideas bounce off the wall and do basic brainstorming. A brainstorming is a brainstorming, but a meeting is a meeting. And so a leader, in addition to the agenda, needs to prepare what are 3 to 5 points that I want to make to my team and get feedback on. Because again, that's what they're looking for me for, to provide direction, to show our goals, and to propose ideas that get us there. A meeting is a way to discuss those ideas, those points, not just to think aloud about the topics on the agenda.
Yeah, fantastic. Joel, great tips you've shared here today. I definitely want to make sure that I give my listeners an opportunity to find out how to follow you or connect with you.
Sure. So the best place to go is to go to www.joelschwartzberg.net because I like to make my work open code, as they say in IT. I like to give it away. So if you go to joelschwartzberg.net, you'll see all the articles that I've written. I've written for Harvard Business Review. I've written for Fast Company. I've written for Toastmaster Magazine. All the different ways that, and techniques really, that help you be a champion of your points. All my podcasts are up there. And basically a list of visual tips are up there as well. Now those visual tips I share on Twitter as well. And I really invite people to join me on Twitter at the Joel Truth. And I make it my job there to share as many communications, leadership communications, and public speaking tips that I can, because I get no greater satisfaction than helping people become stronger creators and stronger champions of their most important ideas.
Oh, fantastic. I will make sure that I include the links of the things that you've just mentioned in our show notes. Joel, I can't thank you enough for joining us here on today on Deliberate Leaders and sharing all of your tips. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allie.
Absolutely. Listeners, I have a quick ask of you. If you found today's topic helpful to you, I would love if you would leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening channel. And when you do that, we will sign you up for a free gift. We will provide you a 1-year membership to the world's #1 business book summary services for leaders. It's our gift to you for helping to help you stay on top of the latest ideas, decide on which books you'd like to read and actually spend your money on. So go ahead and leave us a review today. And thank you so much.